Hello, you beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of the Roaring Agents podcast. I've brought back Stacey Brown Randall, referral expert and author, to help us make our conventions and these group meetings where all of us real estate agents get together, actually make it more effective. Because almost everyone says, I'm there to meet people and build referrals, and very few people actually do it. So I thought I'd bring the expert on to help us do this better. So thank you so much for joining me again, Stacey.
Oh, Mike, I'm excited to be here. This will be great.
So my company has a huge convention coming up here in a couple of weeks, and it's going to be thousands of agents. And what I find is, especially when I go by myself, because I've been with a team before and sometimes friends show up, whatever, but it seems like everyone's kind of in their own little cliques. They've come from their local areas. And it's, so let's start there. Is like, how do you break in without going, hey guys?
What's up? Talk to me.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's like with anything, right? And I think when you go to a conference like this or convention like this, you're with other agents, right? Like, most everybody does what I do. So in theory, that should make it easier, right? Like, hey, we're all in the same world. We're all doing the same thing. But I don't necessarily think that always makes it easier for folks to just walk up to somebody and start carrying on a conversation. I always tell folks when they're trying to figure out how to like start a conversation with a stranger is sometimes, and as cheesy as this is going to sound, but sometimes just have like the three questions that you could ask, right? Or that you would want to ask to start a conversation or to have in your pocket when there's like a lull in the conversation. Because even though you're both agents and you're both there and you're with the same company, and you would assume that conversation would be easier, it's still a new person. It's still someone you've never met before. So sometimes just being like, hey, how do I get this conversation started? Here's kind of my questions I'll ask, or what happens when there's an awkward silence. Here's some questions I can just pull out and ask. And I do that. I do that a lot with people who are very uncomfortable networking, from that perspective of getting them more comfortable with the idea of just have some tools in your toolbox and pull out those questions when you need them. And don't let one of the questions be about the weather. We're better than that. It does not need to be about the weather.
How dare you talk about me like that? Sure is hot in Vegas, isn't it? Oh my gosh. It just feels so stupid.
Can you imagine that heat they're having outside? Yeah.
At least it's a dry heat.
That is true. As Southerners, we know sometimes we'll take the dry heat over that humidity.
What are three just good questions for someone who's like, I don't even know where to start because everything seems silly to them?
Yeah. So sometimes it's like, how long have you been in business? How long have you been an agent? Like, we know the stories that will then come from the how long have you been doing this? And that's a really simple one, right? It's like, hey, how long have you been doing this? And if you're a newer agent, those are opportunities to like soak it in, right? And if you're an agent that's been a little bit more established or whatever, that's an opportunity for you to notice that, hey, this person's only been in it a couple of years. Hey, if you have questions, ask. Like, be a bright spot for somebody else. I mean, that could be huge. So I think it depends on a little bit of your personality and a little bit about what you feel you have to give to the other person if there's a need. But the fastest way to figure that out is ask the question of how long have you been in business? Because when I'm out in a networking event and I'm talking to a business owner who's been in business 2 years, I'm like, oh, honey, let's have that conversation, because I've been doing this a decade. And oh, by the way, this is my second company because the first one failed. So I think it's just that natural curiosity. Like, hey, how long have you been doing this? How long have you been an agent? And then usually not everybody like graduates from college or graduates from high school and becomes an agent. Most people have a life before they decided to become an agent. So there's stories there. Just you can dig in and ask more questions there. Oh, you just became an agent 5 years ago. What'd you do before this? Right. So sometimes having that one question naturally leads you to ask other questions. But here is also something I find that people don't do. If you want to make a conversation easy, you actually have to listen to what they're saying, because that is typically what's going to prompt the next question you would ask. So if you told me, oh, I've been an agent for 5 years, right? And I'm like, well, okay, you're not 20. So obviously you probably did something before this, right? I'm saying this in my head. I would never say this to someone else, but like, okay, great. What'd you do before that? Those questions naturally, and there's connection there. Oh, right. I know somebody who went to that college, right? Like there's all these things that can come up, or there's like those moments of connection that you can find with people when they start telling their story, or you start asking questions for them to explain a little bit about themselves. So definitely, how long have you been in business, right? What did you do before this? And sometimes though, why'd you become an agent would work as well. I mean, I think those are three simple questions. I don't think you need to ask all three and every single conversation you have, but those are three easy questions that most of us can remember.
I'm going to be vulnerable here. I'm not sure if I'll leave this in the podcast, but I'm going to get your opinion on this. Is I find myself, women, as you know, are not treated well by guys. And I find myself being more aware of that. And so I'm less likely, because I don't want them to think the wrong thing. And I don't want them to think whatever. So I'm less likely to approach and start talking to a woman in a networking, because I don't know, I don't want to come across as a creep, or I don't know. I know it's networking specifically, but that's different. But if in these conferences, I don't want them to think that I'm doing anything dumb. So from the female perspective, if you wish to, and like, we don't have to leave this in if you don't want to. I'm not sure if I will, if I feel weird, but you know what I'm saying?
Yes. So I think it's, first of all, I think it's super admirable that you worry about that, because I think a lot of people don't. And I think women, we do find ourselves in situations where we have to sometimes wonder what's the ulterior motive to this conversation. And so for me, right, it's like when I am in those conversations with guys, I will figure out pretty quickly on how to weave into that conversation that I'm married. Like, just so that it's like just there, like it's just out there in the open. Oh my gosh, my husband says that about me all the time too, right? Like whatever it is, right? But I think the more that you're genuine, and the more that you recognize that and you're sensitive to that, and you keep your conversation about business, and you keep it about like what we would call like above board, right? I think that most times women just want to be treated like everybody else, and not like we have to be treated differently because you're a guy talking to a woman. I remember being at a conference one time, and this guy I can't remember, like, I think he was one of the speakers. I don't really remember. Anyways, it was like before one of the sessions, a bunch of us were standing around talking. It was a heavily male attended conference. I wasn't the only female, but there was definitely a lot of guys there. It was a group of guys. We're all hanging out. I had gone to that conference with a buddy of mine. Like, I flew in, he drove up from Charlotte, but we were at that conference. We both had decided to attend that conference together. So we're talking, we have a few other people now we started talking about, they happen to be all guys. He's there. Someone suggests, let's take a selfie, or let's take a picture, right? Let's take a selfie of all of us together. And like, I have the social media to tag it. And he asked me to step out of the picture because he didn't want to offend his wife, who was sitting home watching his social media post and having a woman in the picture. And I don't know how most women would feel about that, but I was highly offended. I was like, why do I not get the moment of the promotion, of the selfie, of taking this picture, of having this memory of whatever it was? Like, on one level, it's like, oh, I think that's awesome that you respect your wife like that. But on the other side, it's like, that's like assuming that this means something, right? And like all of a sudden, like, I shouldn't be in the picture for that reason. And I remember being really offended by the whole situation. So the truth is, I think you never really know what you're going to get when you start talking to people, because we're all different and things all land on us differently. But I think it's just important to like just stay above board and just be like, hey, how long have you been in business? Is this your first conference? How long? Like, this is all, you guys are all with the same brokerage, right? You're all with the same firm. So let's be honest with this one. It's like, when to switch over is usually the question to ask, because this brokerage gets a lot of folks moving to it. I actually have one of my clients inside my building a referable business coaching program just switched to you guys back in June. And so I know, and I've seen this happen with other people gone through my programs. And so that's another question too, but they're about business. So I think some of the uncomfortableness is then just like, it's not there when you keep it about business.
Okay. I appreciate that, because it's always been in the back of my mind, and I'm always trying to be the most respectful and everything I can. So that was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. If it's in the back of your mind, it means you are. So you're doing it right. So I would say go forth and keep doing.
Should you approach a group? Should you approach an individual? Should you approach two people? What is the best way? What's the best situation to maybe connect with people?
I think you have to be open to all types of scenarios. I think if you're the type of person who would approach an individual, then do that because you need to be meeting people. But that I would also say during this convention, take the time to go up to a group too. It's going to be awkward. It's going to be uncomfortable. You're not going to love it. And you're going to really hope that these are like the type of people that are accepting and inclusive and like will ask you to join the conversation and not like, turn their back to you and like sidestep you out of the conversation. I have a 13-year-old daughter and I tell her, I was like, mean girls exist at 13 and guess what? They exist at 43 too. Like it just is what it is. Like, I don't know why it is. And I'm sure guys are the same way. Right. But like, I think that you have a natural way that you're comfortable engaging in conversation with strangers at events like this. That is allowed to be your go-to, that you're allowed to start the conference off. You're allowed to start your days off in a scenario where you're more comfortable. Hey, you're more comfortable turning to the person sitting next to you because you're kind of captive, then do that. But also be willing to kind of like just step out that comfort zone and be like, you know what, I'm going to approach this group and see what happens. Worst thing could happen is they don't talk to me and I'll head off and get a drink, right? I mean, and I'll go find somebody else to talk to. But I think you should be willing to step outside your comfort zone, but you don't have to start there. I always find that the best way to meet people is whoever I'm sitting next to in a room when I'm at a conference, because you're kind of captive. You're kind of both there. You can have those conversations. And then if there's a commonality there, or you like, oh, we struck up a really great conversation, then it's another familiar face out there in the masses when you're walking to the next, session you're going to go to.
You brought up asking how long you've been in business. And that was sitting with me. And I realized why it was sitting with me is because I think that's one thing people are afraid to get asked if they're new. And you need to own it. And everyone started new. And I was at a small conference yesterday and the speaker's like, okay, I want everyone to stand up who's got a license. All right. Now, if you've been in the business this long, you've had this many transactions, then sit down. And then once he got over 200, he's like, all right, come up on stage. One person had been up there, did 2,000 transactions. He's like, you were sitting next to this person and you had no idea. That you need to be talking to people to find out who you can learn from. And I think what you just said about, oh, you're new in the business, I got some things for you. So anyone who's scared to talk that they're going to ask you that's why you want to get asked. You want to have those conversations. So
yeah. And I think it's harder for the client you're working with. So I don't know if we talked about this in the first episode I was on or not, but I used to be an agent. Right. I know exactly what it was like to have that first deal. And you are desperately trying to act as if it's not your first deal. You're like, how do I say things so she doesn't think I've never done this before? And I had one of those first deals where like we're sitting at the closing table and then the sellers of the home are like bringing up things that my buyer did not agree to. And I was like, oh, for the love, we did cross every document, right? We did sign every document. We crossed every T, we dotted every I, and we were in the right and they were in the wrong. And it all worked out well. The real estate attorney was like, nope, it's right here. All the signatures are there. You did agree to this. But I remember like being new and trying not to be new. But I think that vulnerability, when you go to a place where everyone's agents, everybody was new, everybody's got a story to tell from that perspective. And coming out of a place of, if you are willing to come at it from a place of, hey, whoever I'm talking to, I may have a nugget for them, or they're going to have a nugget for me. And creating that safe space is really, really important. Not everybody's going to do it. Not every agent is there to help others. Some of them are just there to help themselves. But you can figure out who those people are pretty quickly and then excuse yourself with the excuse like, you got to take this phone call or you need to go use the restroom and get out of that conversation.
There are a lot of people who got their nose in their phones. I've found that I was like, okay, I need to go. Cause look, I'm more of an introvert. I am less like, I went to my dry cleaner a few years ago and she'd hand me, oh, Mike, I was like, all right, I need to be more of an extrovert. And I was like, well, I realize you know my name, but I don't know your name. She goes, yeah, I don't do that. And I was like, okay, well, that's enough extroverting for today.
Oh my gosh. That's kind of funny. Like, yes, here's what I always tell. That's what I always tell myself, or I always tell my kids when things like that happen. I'm like, that is going to be used for a funny story down the line. You just got to hang on to that one.
Yeah.
Because it'll be funny down the road. It's not going to be funny right now. But yeah, I think that there shouldn't be a comparison of how many of these conversations you're going to have, right? Like I would never tell someone you should be talking to 10 new agents every day while you're at that conference, because to an introvert, that's going to feel awful. Guess what? To an extrovert, that feels awful too. Like, and it doesn't matter that carrying on a conversation is something that technically an extrovert may be better at than an introvert, which actually isn't true. It's the starting of the conversation. Right. That's really all that is. Most introverts, I personally think, sometimes have better personalities. I just offended a whole bunch of extroverts. I recognize when I said that. But I think the reality of it is that it's doing this within a place that it's like slightly stepping out of your comfort zone, doing some things you maybe not normally do, and recognize that that's not all going to go perfectly. Like it's just not all going to go swimmingly with all these conversations. And then your ability to carry on conversations with people, like some people are on their phones because they got nobody else to talk to. Like that's me. If you see me at a networking event and I'm in my phone, it's just because at that moment, I probably didn't have anybody in my line of sight to go talk to. So I was like, okay, let me just right. Unless it's like a kid calling, and then obviously that's a little bit different.
So it's funny is my next question was going to be, should there be a goal of how many people you talk to?
So I think you should set a goal. I just don't think I'm the one to set it for anybody listening, right? Okay. Like the introvert may be like, hey, 5 is like going to tax me out. And the extrovert may be like, I'm going to do 15. But our goals and your goals along with somebody else's shouldn't be. But also remember, you've got to make sure that there's spaces for those conversations to happen. So if you're an introvert and you're thinking it's really hard to walk up to a stranger and say, hey, how long have you been in business? Or, hey, where are you from? Or, right, anything like that, tell me about your very first crazy deal, or, whatever you want to say to the person, then you need to do it when it's a little bit easier. It's easier when you're in the same place for the same reason. You've both walked up to the bar to grab a drink. You're both over at the machine to get a soda. You're both sitting in the same room together. That would be how I would look at it. Not like I'm going to walk from across the room to a huge group of people and interject myself into them and have a conversation. That does not have to be on your to-do list. But I do think if you don't go in with some objective, you won't accomplish what you want to accomplish. I'm just saying you've got to figure out what that is for you, figure out what feels comfortable, and then maybe like add 1 or 2.
I've done a lot of these conventions, and I have a Ziploc bag of cards that I've never pulled out. I haven't called them. I haven't emailed them because I was like, I don't think they care. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to be relevant, give them value, whatever. How should I approach this?
Yeah, so I think the first thing you have to recognize is that usually other agents want to know other agents. It's one of the only industries where we see this happen because that 25% commission is going to be paid, right? From that perspective of when an agent refers to another agent. So there's like a strategic business objective behind having this community of other agents. What I think makes it overwhelming is that you could know 100 other agents that are scattered all across the country, but what are the odds you're actually going to have someone move to one of their towns, to one of their cities, right? And so that's when it's like, oh, how do I keep up with all these people? So I think that you have to start off by understanding how you're going to organize. And then I think you have to figure out from that step forward, what is your outreach going to look like? And because you never know if another agent's going to refer to you, or you can refer to another agent because, hey, you're in, like, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and that other agent is, in Portland, Oregon. Like, I don't know. Am I ever going to refer? Like, it's the idea of having that information and then knowing that this isn't a monthly thing. Nobody needs the Charlotte, North Carolina market update when they're an agent halfway across the country. They just don't, right? So your communication looks different. How you follow up looks different. But I think uniquely, because this is hey, we can send business back and forth and there's a cut of it and everybody knows it and it's all above board and it's all like legitimate, right? That you can actually leverage that in your conversations. And I think this is advice I would not give to my other clients about having a conversation with another agent, right? Like, hey, do you have an agent in Charlotte that you actually send people to when you know people moving to this area? Like, hey, if not, I would love just to be on your list, right? I mean, it really does start like that. But if you don't actually stay organized in terms of where are all these people and Do you know where they are? Whether that is in your CRM and they're tagged as like another agent and then by their geographical location, or if it's in an Excel spreadsheet and you just have, here's who I know by state or by like city or whatever. If you can't stay organized and you can't take those business cards out of that Ziploc bag, it doesn't really matter what the follow-up is, right? But I do think that initial follow-up after, hey, we met, remember I was the agent, right? We talked about this. If you could, like, I always think you get cards or you walk away from someone and you write down something you learned about them. But that's habit and that is being disciplined to do it. And most people just don't, right? Sometimes I do it at the end of the day when I get back to my room. I'm like, okay, who did I meet? Do I remember things about them? But it's like, how are you going to organize that information? And look at it from the perspective of, these are now all agents I can send a client to when they're moving, versus wondering if those folks are going to send people to you. Look at it. This is my network of where I send people. And then the follow-up can follow that. And then if the reverse happens and they actually send people to you, great. That's awesome. You just got a client. But look at it from like, okay, this is my network. These are people. When somebody moves to Georgia, who do I know? When somebody moves, right? Like, but you have that information. And then I think how you decide to continue that conversation with them, it's not going to be complicated, and it's probably not going to be anything you spend a lot of money on, but it could be maybe the quarterly email that you send out personally, not in a mass like email to everybody, which we all have those automation tools in our business, but just like, hey, just checking in. It's, we met at the conference 4 months ago. Just want to see, how are you doing? How's the market? Right? Is there anything I can do to help you? Because helping another agent at that point may just be, how would you handle this scenario? It isn't send me a client. So it's just about being intentional about building those relationships. But if you don't start with some level of organization, those business cards just sit in a baggie and they are there from year to year to year. And the organization takes time, which is why a lot of people don't do it. Hopefully I'm not calling you out.
I will give agents some hope, and the one bag is still full. I have not opened it, but I opened another one, and I'm going to give some agents some hope that are like, oh, maybe they don't want to hear from me. I decided to call through people. I was like, I've got to make these calls, and I got this one guy, and he's like, you were the first person to call me from that conference.
Yep.
He goes, I thought I made a bunch of good relationships. No one's picking up my phone calls, and nobody's calling me. So by you actually following through, you are head and shoulders above the people like me in previous times where I didn't call and all those other agents. You stand out as a professional, and you stand out as someone who follows up. And that's what we want in professionals, people who show up and follow up. So this is why I wanted to have this conversation. I wanted to give, wherever you are on the spectrum, some ideas and tactics and strategies to actually show up as a professional, to build a network, because this market is changing. And one of those places that you're going to be able to get other business is from other agents around the country, because people are moving all the time. What else have we not covered that you think is important for this narrow silo that we're kind of talking about today?
Okay, so I always find with folks that have the best of intentions to stay organized, but then don't. It's not because they can't be organized. It's not because they can't put in the time to enter in some information, right? It's because once they have it entered in, they don't know what they're going to do as part of their follow-up. So let's establish that now. So when you have those names in your database or in an Excel spreadsheet, if I'm going to do 4 outreaches this year from the conference forward over 12 months, what am I doing and what am I saying? Well, I think variety is the spice of life. So maybe the first thing you're going to do is within 30 days of getting back home from that conference, you're going to send each of those folks a handwritten card. Just like, hey, I'm so glad we met, right? It was nice to meet you. I'm glad we talked about X, Y, Z. And if you can't remember that, you can't remember that. But it's like a handwritten card. And this is the time I would tell you, put your business card in, or maybe put a QR code sticker right in that card, or maybe it's on the back of the card you send them, right? That you're handwriting this note, because this is an agent to agent relationship. Like if you've ever followed me with any of my referral stuff, I'm always like, never put your logo on anything. Like I'm very, very firm about that. This is different, and I want you to treat it differently. So I want you to send that thank you card 30 days after the conference and somehow let them know who you are. Like, hey, I'm the agent you met from Charlotte, right? Here's my contact information. It's on the back of this card. Here's my business card. Love to stay in touch. Love to be of service to you. Like to help you if you ever got a sticky situation, you want to bounce it off an agent, not in your own office, right? There's always light you can make of the situations we know others are experiencing, right? So maybe that's the first one. Then maybe the second one, right? You're actually going to do a phone call. And you can map out right there, like, hey, okay, so when I call this person, what would I say? Well, I probably say, hey, probably going to get voicemail. Let's be honest. And just what's my voicemail message going to be? Map that out. Hey, it's so-and-so. We met at the conference. I hope you got my card. Hope you're doing well. It's crazy here with our market. I was just reaching out to see how you're doing. I just wanted to check on you. Like, that was like 4 sentences. Like, it wasn't a complicated message. They may call you back. They may not call you back, but I guarantee you they're going to get it. Right. And then maybe your third follow-up is you're going to send them a personalized video. These are my favorite to do when I have people join my programs, and I hold the phone up on my walk, which means I can have sunglasses on, a hat on, and I don't have to care how I look. Right. It's super simple. And I'm on a walk, so you don't expect me to have, like, my hair and makeup done with a jacket on. And maybe your third follow-up is going to be a personalized message, but personalized means not mass sent. So it is one person, you're saying their name. Hey, Mike. Just following up to say, hey, it was so great to meet you at the conference. I'm so glad we're staying connected, or what, because at this point now, let's hope that Mike has followed up to maybe my card or my voicemail or my phone call, right? And so now I'm sending a video message, and it's the third touch. And so I'm sending a video message. And then maybe the fourth touch just happens to fall around a holiday. And while I'm sending out my Christmas cards to everybody else, why don't I just include you in that as well? So you can make this as simple as you want, but I find that when people get stuck, I see this a lot. And I looked over just at my husband's desk. He's not here right now, but I looked over his desk because I thought of him when I thought of this. He'll kill me, but whatever. He's not going to listen to this. But I thought to myself, it's like, it's never that he can't get organized when he meets a bunch of people or he goes to these networking events. His response is always, what do I do with it now? Right. And when he can solve that, then he's much more motivated to get the people into the database so he can set up the reminders to, oh, it's time to send a thank you or the handwritten card about nice to meet you. Oh, it's time to make a voicemail or call. Maybe they'll answer, but probably a voicemail. Oh, it's time to send a personalized video. Oh, I want to add them to my Christmas list or my Hanukkah list or whatever it is. It's about knowing what you're going to do and then backing into it usually motivates you to stay more organized.
The confused mind does nothing.
And hides and enjoys it, but deep down hates it, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I look every once in a while, I'm cleaning things up or moving stuff, and I find this stupid Ziploc bag, and I will not throw it away. But I'm like, but I feel bad every time. I'm like, I should really tomorrow. And off to the next thing.
Yes. And here's the thing. I think it's also important for us to be really real with ourselves. Anything that produces results for us on the back end will always take work on the front end, period.
How dare you?
I know. I may speak the truth, right? But we all know that, right? It's like people tell me, they come to me and they're like, hey, I want to get referrals and I want to get them the way that you teach them. I'm like, great. Guess what? I don't have a silver bullet or a magic button. You're actually going to have to do some work. I just will make it way more fun than the icky asking work. And I'm like, but it's still work. Like, if you want that, you're going to have to do the work. It's the same thing with this. Like, if you want these agents that maybe in 6 months or 12 months for you to have 15 or 20% of your business coming from other agents referring to you, it's going to be because you put the work in after you left this conference and you made the commitment to do something different. And sometimes that means you probably need an accountability partner that can come alongside you and be like, have you done it? Have you done it? Have you done it? Right? As many times as they need to ask you for you to do it. But if you want it to work, you're going to have to put in the effort on the front end. And that's hard because we're busy. And sometimes we just avoid the hard things, but that's what it takes.
This has been fantastic. I thought this was going to be shorter and we got into so much good stuff. This is good. I think that, you made the point about the business cards. I need to make this the next podcast that comes out so people have time to get to change, get the plan ready and everything before this conference happens in 2.5 weeks. Is that right? Oh, wow. Yes.
Yes. Well, you can also get cards made too, right? And then just put your contact information in the back of the card.
Yeah.
So either way.
Any last words? Anything? Any last little things?
The one thing I would tell yourself as you're going to this conference is I want you to think about the question I ask my 13-year-old daughter from time to time, which is, were you brave today? Maybe you need to ask yourself that at the end of the first day of the conference. Like, was I brave today? Did I do the things I want to do because I'm trying to take my business to the next place or the next level or whatever? Was I brave today? And if you weren't, well, conferences are usually never one day. Usually there's always a second or a third day. So take advantage of that and be like, okay, I wasn't as brave day one. That's okay. Extend some grace, move on. I can be brave the next day. And then go be brave and do the things you want to do. And most people don't bite. So it's okay to walk up to a stranger. In this scenario, you may talk to strangers. It is approved. It is allowed.
And for those that are not afraid of talking to people, don't be afraid or be brave to do the follow-up on the other side. Yeah. Be brave to do the organizational part of it, because that's another piece. What programs, what things do you have to offer people who are wanting to really build up their whole referral business in general?
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about when you reached out and said, hey, let's do an episode on this. We've got the conference coming up. And I have a few people in my coaching program. It's called Building a Referable Business. We call it BRB for short. It's my coaching program. And we just finished having a conversation for a couple of them that have conference. It's conference season for everybody, right? Mm-hmm. I know that as a speaker. Other people know that as attending conferences. And they're like, hey, should we be leveraging this? I'm like, is my name Stacey? Yes, we should be leveraging this. Let me show you how to leverage this from a referral perspective. Most people don't pay attention to the things that they can be strategic about. Yeah. Now, my area is going to be referrals. I'm going to do everything from that perspective. I'm not going to teach you things that I don't know or haven't seen work or haven't proven to be successful. But there is, in everything you do, usually, not always, but usually a way to look at this from a referral perspective. And that's what I get to talk about in my coaching program, because these folks are with me. They show up when they have questions and I get to answer them, and we have one-on-one calls together. So if this was a conversation, you're like, this would have been great information and I'd like to have this in future scenarios, well, then my coaching program, Building a Referable Business, could be something for folks to check out. And everything's on my homepage of my website, staceybrownrandall.com.
Thank you so much for taking the time today. You said you'd come back, and I'm sure we'll have another subject to cover in the future. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Mike.